Okay, a treat, I think, for everyone today. On the show today, Josh Schrei. So Josh is from the Emerald. I usually just say the Emerald is the best podcast I've ever heard. Um, and I've recommended it the last few months to all of my students. Many of us are now obsessed with it to a slightly unhealthy degree, Josh, I would say. Um, and I almost don't want to call it a podcast because when you think podcast, you think of something clumsy like what I put together, interviewing people on Zoom. But it's actually sort of music industry level quality
Mm,
production values combined with sort of poetic level narration slash interviews slash music. And every one of them seems like a trance induction.
mm.
Do you know what I mean, Josh? Trance induction. So every one of them is sort of more like a shamanic experience than people might be used to. And I absolutely love them. It's changed my whole way of looking at embodiment over the last few months.
Mm.
Um, so Josh, you are so welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here. And, that description of what the podcast is one of the more accurate descriptions I've heard. So, yeah, there's musical interweaving and storytelling, and it is meant to be a journey. It is meant to be an experience because a lot of what I'm working with is the understanding that the power of story is a spoken, transmitted acoustic power that in the age of the written word, we've lost a lot of that. And the purpose of it really is and has been for thousands upon thousands of years to take people on a journey. So the podcast is definitely, positively, 100% designed to take people on a journey. It's designed to be trance induction. It's funny, like, people get really kind of shy and awkward around that. Like, oh my God, they're seeking to take me into a trance. And then, storytelling is meant to take people into a trance space. Music is meant to take people into a trance space. We should be open about it because there are all kinds of things in our modern world that are also designed to take us into trance spaces that we don't give much credit to all the time, like our phone, for example. So, storytelling can be an incredibly positive means of accessing that trance space and being taken on a journey.
Yeah, after listening to episodes, I often feel like I've been sort of dancing with fairies in the woods or something. They definitely state altering. I've shed tears over episodes and had great insights over episodes. And
Mm,
it's not information. And I've long said that our culture really confuses wisdom with information. We're in this
mm,
information heavy age. So it's something much more than information that you're doing. And I think that's very apparent to people. And often people just say like, they just love it. They just say it's very good. And it clearly stands out. There's some very high level meditation teachers, for example, who were insisting I listen to it before I did.
mm,
It stands out to people who've done quite a lot of practice, is what I've noticed.
mm. Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm just doing my best to tell good story and combine it with sound and create an experience. And it's for me the crystallization of a lifetime of study and a lifetime of practice and a lifetime of trials and tribulations and difficult learnings to arrive at what I feel is a way to give voice to some of the forces at play in our interesting world. Right.
Let's start with that lifetime then. And I know, as a storyteller, storytellers often, good storytellers don't talk about themselves much. And I know that listeners are curious. Like a lot of my friends have just been saying, well, who is this guy? And I said,
Yeah.
I think he has some kind of professional music background, and I've heard he's done a lot of yoga and meditation. And like let's hear a bit about your life story before we, go to the animism and the work. So what's your story, Josh?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right that I don't really like to talk about myself too much. I find the subject matter of the myths and stories, I find talking about the animate force that moves through this universe, I find that much more interesting. And it's kind of, a function of the modern West that we do put so much emphasis on the messenger and not so much on like the source of what they're talking about. and I also understand that, it's totally natural to want to know, like, who's this guy that's saying all this stuff, right? And, we could spend the whole time on that, but I really don't want to, because the story is quite long. But I guess the encapsulation of the story is that I was I was born into spiritual practice. I was born into a Zen Buddhist community. And spiritual practice really formed the foundation of my youth. We lived in India when I was young. I got exposed to Tibetan Tantra when I was very young. I studied it diligently all through my high school years. At the same time, I was in the Southwest United States and exposed to Native American traditions and studied in the Lakota tradition. Started studying movement and the martial arts traditions when I was a teenager. My whole life has really been, on the one hand, you could say, immersion in practice, not from a scholarly approach, but from an actual practice within lineage approach. And so that's coming to the Emerald. I see these days there's kind of a fracture in the spiritual world and the yoga world, you could say. I think there's a lot of scholarship happening now, which is wonderful. I think it's great to have this scholarship out there. And then it's also important to have the reminder that these traditions traditionally were not, solely scholarly traditions. They were traditions of transmission and practice and felt vibration. So that's something I'm definitely seeking to hit at in the work. And then on the other hand, you have just a lot of mischaracterizations and people who aren't studying in lineage at all, and it's become kind of a circus out there. I don't know if you've noticed.
I have noticed that one. Yes.
Right. So, that aspect of my background definitely has led me to want to be, talking about these traditions from the perspective of feeling them and experiencing them and having it be felt. And then there's a whole other side to it, which is the musical side. And yes, I studied and produced music quite a long time ago and worked in rock and roll. And then there was what you could call kind of the interplay between those two things, the interplay of spirituality and music and in my life. And really what I see now is kind of, I think that many of us have, who are called to, the mystical, a real longing to experience what you could call rapture, a real longing to experience conjunctive union, to experience ecstasy, whether I was seeking that through spiritual practice or animate study or through music. And all of this then too, and it's not something I talk about too much, but I'm certainly open to talk about it when people ask, would not be what it is today without a deep dive into what has been called the dark night of the soul. What's that?
Addiction?
Yeah.
You feel, I'm in long-term recovery, and you feel like one of the club.
Yeah.
I look at your eyes, I look at you, and I go, I think he's one of us.
Yeah. So that, what I would call that longing for rapture, and that work and music and all of this led me down, the road of seeking it in unhealthy ways, and went deep into those dark spaces. And it was only after I went through that, I think, that I really came to understand the, what you could call the materiality of the spirituality that I had studied. Having been raised in it, it was second nature to me. I knew all the concepts. I knew all the, not all the teachings, but I was familiar with a lot of the teachings. But I think until it was actually tested in the fires of my life, I hadn't embodied it. I hadn't felt it deep into my body. And then when it became a matter of life and death, when it became a matter of you are going to, you are going to put this into practice or you are going to die, then it all became a lot much more clear. So the work of the Emerald, I don't think would be what it is today without having, well, I know it wouldn't be what it is today because I wouldn't be here. It wouldn't be what it is today without having gone through that. So what you're talking about, I guess, overall is an alchemical picture that combines a deep longing for rapture, a love of music, a love of storytelling, a love and connection to the felt experience of the animate, combined with, hopefully over these years, an understanding that, the questions that are being spoken about and that we're exploring and everything are essential questions for survival. They're not just like drifts down flights of fancy. They're like, there are many of us, I feel, who long for what I call rapture, right? Who long for this ecstasy, who long for this experience of conjunctive union. And it's been so bifurcated in our society. You mentioned in a prior conversation, a quick conversation, you mentioned debauchery, right? It's like we've entered this time of like, oh, it's either sacred or it's debaucherous, right? And really, traditionally, these things were not separated. That the longing for like deep ecstasy in union with the ultimate is a absolutely natural human longing, and in fact, it's an essential human experience. And so I'm hoping through the work to speak to those wandering bards out there and those who long for connection to the animate and those who long for the experience of rapture and who've always flirted with intensity. I'm hoping to, cut through the modern clutter and speak right to the heart and say, yes, this is essential. This is essential human experience. We're meant to find these states of rapture, right? And what we have to discover is how to do it in a way that works within us and within our communities and that can be translated into long-term practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just shut up and let you roll there because I was really enjoying that that little trance induction into it. I'm going to keep it on you just for a little bit longer. I get that might not be too comfortable.
It's fine.
It's fine, really. I'm hearing this unique combination of sort of technical skills. There's a technical excellence to the podcast that I've only really heard on like the BBC and stuff, in terms of the editing and things like that. And then depth, because what people are really loving as much as the beautiful poetry, and I write poetry, so I do hear the beautiful poetry. I'm going to ask you if it's scripted at some point. It's the pain behind that. Like I was trying to explain the concept of depth to one of my foreign students who doesn't speak very good English. I sent them a video of Johnny Cash singing "Hurt," and it's the end of his life, and this is like a man who's loved and lost a lot. And actually I've seen Indian tribes people watch that video and get it. Just immediately go, oh wow, this guy's been around. And that's what I think, there's that quality. So it doesn't surprise me that there's that there. And then just a lot of practice, as you say, like it's easy to have a theory and that's just a rumor if it's till it's in the flesh. And there's a lot of clever people on the internet, maybe myself one of them, memeing and saying smart things, and then to actually kind of hear it with the practice background. The other thing strikes me as unique is this. It's not, how can I put this ungently? It's not sort of silly hippie bollocks. A lot of us, I think, are drawn to animism, the idea that, we might have to explain that to some listeners, but the idea that things are alive, that it's not a dead, objective world. And we have that instinct, we have that feeling like, I moved house 6 months ago, and the feeling to develop a relationship to the river outside my house. It's a very natural urge, and I think many of us have that urge, but then we also have a modernist mind that struggles, and sometimes there's a sort of kind of a fake hippie version of it that's just sort of annoying. And I've been wanting a way in to animism for years, it feels like, but a lot of the stuff was just kind of repulsive to me, or not as thoroughly researched as yours is. And Ken Wilber talks about sort of pre-trans fallacy. Have you come across that one? And it's a pre-modern looks like postmodern, or actually in your case, meta-modern. So they look the same, right? In that they're both not industrial modern.
Right.
and most people are kind of retreating to a kind of superstition when they go to this work.
Mm.
So it becomes like, I don't know, I'm manifesting a parking space or something, it's
I have prayed to the parking gods
the
before. I do.
parking gods, the Uber gods today to get to this one. So there's something in there as well that it's actually fairly sophisticated in it's sort of intellectually as well as embodied through pain and experience. That's the long way of saying it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I studied in lineage tradition for most of my life. I am an unabashed syncretist, meaning I love studying varying traditions. So you're not going to find someone in me who only studied one tradition for his entire life and that's it. And I think the more we look around, the more we see that traditions are syncretist and traditions do draw from many sources. So I think that syncretism is positive. But within those traditions I studied for a long time and continue to study. Um, so, at the same time, I grew up in Santa Fe, like during the first iteration of the New Age movement. And I saw like what you're talking about, just, I saw it 30 years ago, like what you're talking about. And I saw its pitfalls and I saw its short-sightednesses. And, you know, the understanding of animacy, I'll come back to that in a second, but a big part of the drive behind this podcast is to demonstrate and show like all of these things that traditional cultures have been talking about for thousands of years aren't woo-woo at all. Modern science wants to draw this false divide sometimes between the scientific and the religious, and like, either you are an empirical Western scientist or you're off in this realm of total fantasy, and that's just not the case. Traditional cultures are incredibly empirical. They just happen to see the subject as an integral part of the story, right? And let me just finish. And I see you have something you want to add. In this last episode on the animacy of supposedly inanimate objects, I talk very plainly, and I'm interviewing an incredible Native American sculptor named Rose Simpson, who's a friend of mine, Rose B. Simpson. And, we talk very plainly about how the number one thing that comes with a recognition of the animate world is responsibility. It's not like, oh, the rocks are talking, how beautiful, I'm going to go trip out. It's, oh, I'm being watched and what I do matters, right? It's I'm in this interconnected world, this world of vibration that we always talk about in like modern tantric circles, like, oh, it's all vibration. If we really start to understand that there is a life force that surrounds us and permeates us, of which we are a part, if we really start to understand the sensitivity and all pervasiveness of this field, of this pool, however you want to see it, if we really start to understand being and animacy, that we understand that each word we say casts ripples, each action we do casts ripples. This is why spiritual traditions put so much focus on how we conduct ourselves. It's like the fundamental nature of it. It's not just arbitrary power structures trying to tell us what to do. It's a fundamental it can turn into that, but it's a fundamental recognition of what we do matters, what we say matters. We are in relation. We are in a state of, mutual shared responsibility with all of creation. And it's interesting that in the modern West, we put so much emphasis on freedom, right? Our rights and freedoms, our rights and freedoms. I'm allowed to do this, right? That's like the fundamental building block of, the Western humanism, basically. What am I allowed to do? Native traditions look much more at what am I required to do? What am I responsible for? So the recognition of the animate, yes, it wants to call us into that place of conjunctive union, that place of ecstasy, that place of rapture. And when we enter into that place of rapture, right, and I'm sure you've had this experience, when we enter into that place of rapture, we feel a deep empathy for all of creation. And in that state of deep empathy, it makes us, hopefully, if we're practicing regularly, it makes us want to take care of our relations. It makes us want to be in good relation with each other and with the animate world. That's not woo-woo. There's nothing woo-woo about that, right? like turning the lens on ourselves and saying, okay, how do I need to work in order to be in better relation with an animate world, is far from woo woo, right? And so, yeah, I have a strong hope to, you know, it's like that there is that total woo woo thread that you're talking about that's out there, which is a function of modernism also, right? But it's such hubris for the modern world to look at 300,000 years of human history, 300,000 years of hunter-gatherer history,
Beyond arrogance.
foundation of 99.9% of our history, which is animist, and
Yes.
just say like, all that's all like new age nonsense, or that's all, it's such hubris to say that. And so I'm trying to work as best I can to help center that animate vision again, because that animate vision is the substrate of everything. It's the substrate of how consciousness works. It's the substrate of reality.
Hold that thought, because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
to
totally.
help listeners that
Yeah.
maybe
Sometimes you have to stop me because I tend
you
to
don't
roll.
mind. I'll be Irish and jump in, have two
Yeah.
conversations at once. So you make the sort of seemingly irrational rational, like, oh shit, that's why I love adornment. Oh, that's why that girl on the Zen retreat put a flower in her hair. Oh, that's why I love festivals.
Mm.
Oh, like at the weekend I was with an ex-military friend. He's a ex-parachute regiment officer, so sort of best of British, conservative, army ranger type. And we were planning a work together. He said, let's go out into the woods, and we had a campfire. And he's like, I don't know why, but I have my best ideas out in the woods, around the campfire with the phone off, and it's someone that urge is within us. And as you say, it's 99.9% of our genetic legacy. So of course it's in us. This is what we're dealing with, whether we like it or not. And then not turning to superstition in that, but at the same time making room for the, not just stripping it down to, here's the logical reason why festivals are a good thing and we should all do ritual. And this is why marriage is good. It's not just this, you're not psychologizing it. That was the breakthrough episode for a lot of people recently, that it's not reducible to psychology. As someone who's worked in a lot of war zones, for example, like trauma work is not reducible to psychology. It absolutely isn't. And there's an instinct there for that. Not leaving space for the magic while still giving kind of rational reasoning explanations why ritual might be important, for example.
And practicing it to feel why it's important, right? Like, I mean, part of the huge problem of the Western world's relationship with ritual is all of the analysis happens from the outside, and ritual is meant to be a subjective experience that's felt of the individual in communion with the greater world, right? And if you're a colonial era anthropologist, you're not going to understand. You can point to all the external reasons why this is beneficial to society and all this kind of stuff,
Sure.
but you have to do it. You just have to do it. You have to enter those states. You have to get out of the non-rational mind. You have to get out of the rational mind. You have to get out of the force that would want to remove us from the world and seek to analyze it from the outside, right? Which has incredible application. Objective science, has incredible application that we all benefit from every day, right? But it's not an end worldview into itself. It's not an end into itself. It helps us when we want to isolate compounds and when we want to, see behavioral trends within things without the bias of the subject. It helps us in many, 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 many ways, but it doesn't get to the heart of the human experience, which is ultimately subjective and ultimately always will be. We're not rational creatures. I mean, I did an episode a long while back. I don't know if you ever got a chance to hear it, but I did an episode called "When Exactly Was the Age of Reason?" ? Right? And all these the supposedly rational drives behind modernism. I mean, modernism is like possibly the most irrational expression of human behavior that has ever existed. Modernism is completely unrational. You can use reason. Like if your ultimate goal is to get to a place where, like, we can accumulate vast amounts of stuff and not feel guilty about it, then you can put rationalism to get to that place. But ritual is one of the most rational things that humans do. Ritual is, it's absolutely like when we live in a world that we feel distanced from, to have some type of means of feeling reconnected, that's rational. It's like, yeah. And we have this idea that ritual is superstition or ritual is irrational. I maintain that ritual is one of the most like fundamentally rational things that people do. If it wasn't, would 100% of cultures do it?
Sure. Marriage, funerals, even the remnants of it in Western culture are hugely important to people for good reason.
Exactly.
So yeah. Nothing. It's not nothing to go to someone's funeral. It's not nothing. It's a big deal. There's a few directions. A horrible question. What's it for? Very modern question. What's the emerald for? Like, you put a lot of energy into each one. I'm guessing a couple of weeks of work for each one.
About a month. Really.
About a month.
Yeah.
And some of them are 2 hours long.
Yeah.
You dropped one just before this interview, you bastard. So I had to listen to it on the plane today. And that's a huge amount of work. And part of me goes, the point is that it's not for anything. Maybe it's just artistic expression. It's like, what's a child's dancing for? It's just ears. If someone were to pin you down in a modernist butterfly pinned to the collector's table, what would you say it was for?
At its heart, it's to help reconnect us to the voice of the animate. I mean, that's the simplest way I know how to put it. It's to help reconnect us to the voice of the animate. It's to help reconnect me. I mean, I find in doing the work that I'm, it's profound work for me. And then my hope is that it helps reconnect people. So if people listen to the podcast and they have an experience of feeling something, of being taken on a journey, of being taken into a state of reconnection, of dropping the external, objective, rational mind for just a moment and going to that space of, oh, right, I remember now. I remember the voice of the waters. I remember the breath of the cloud, right? I remember the growth of the vegetation. I remember that I'm part of this and that all this has a voice and that I can hear this voice and I can sing back. I can sing back too in my own way. This is how the muse has been worked with and felt for so long, like the bardic journey, the journey of the one who listens to the voice of the universe and sings back. So many of us have let that voice stifle in this modern world. So many of us have lost that sense of attunement, right? Where, we hear that voice and it inspires us to create and sing back in whatever way we sing back. And that could be through writing, it could be through music, it could be through doing body work, it could be through collective organizing, it could be through, how you work within whatever facet, whatever world you work in, whatever that is. I'm hoping to instill the felt experience of attunement and listening to the great voice and finding our way to sing back, right?
And it's very conservative friendly for reasons you said earlier, actually. The animist work, and maybe we should briefly define that just for kind of newer listeners. There's a way in which someone could be quite kind of magically orientated, as some people are. I think of a friend of mine, Lawrence, who's just would have been a wizard in any other, culture, would have been the shaman. And then some people are they just know they like going to weddings, they just have some instinct like that. They don't have to be sort of Bali alternative yoga types, I think, to hear that calling in the way that you present it. The other thing I hear is just ridiculous passion in that. It's just it feels like it really matters to you. And I go, wow, this guy really gives a shit about bringing this forward, as you say, remembering it, helping us remember it. That is the right verb, I think. There's only one time I think I heard you kind of slip into something like from fierce caring into something like not more than anger. Like it was like sometimes I hear a frustration, particularly in the earlier podcasts. You seem much more chill now. A couple of years ago, the podcast had this like, why don't you fucking get it kind of tone? You fucking idiots, you know? That's what I kind of heard the tone a couple of years ago. I don't know if it's you've had children or something since, but it sort of the earlier it feels less angry now, but just as caring, just as passionate. Tell me if I'm mishearing this.
Yeah, I think, like, I was in a rock and roll band when I was younger. We were like vehemently, against the system. I've had acerbic critiques of capitalism and modernity my entire life. I've had that sense of, why don't you just get it? That's been a driving force in my life. It's tempered a bit with age, where I've had enough experience to understand that, like, I have a lot to get to. And right, I think that trying to find a way to communicate sometimes, I think sometimes, like, you could say, for example, like the yoga world leaves itself open to some pretty pointed critiques.
Anyone who's got any clown in them, which is one of my main archetypes, is just go, oh really, guys? Like, come on, you can't set me up like that. That's the JP Spears kind of instinct, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a place for the pointed critique, and I think there's a place for poking a little fun at everything. That has to do with this crazy modern world. And then I think there's also like a strong desire in me to hold paradox and to hold complexity. Yes. and to give space for all of it, because a lot of what I find around discourse these days is it gets way too into, like, putting up walls and saying this is the only way to see it and that kind of thing. So, it's a dance. The fundamental experience I want people to have is an experience of journey and transport, of being, taken into a feeling, and then within that, I like to give space for what you could call like social critiques, or, having some good fun at the expense of the yoga world and that kind of thing.
Well, it's the yoga world, but more profoundly.
Yeah, I say the yoga world just because I was in it for quite a long time.
Right,
but it's like, it's a larger world than that.
The anterior deltoid cult. Yoga. So you can always spot them from all the push-ups, the spiritual.
From all the chaturangas.
Spiritual push-ups are cool. So, do you love the West?
I mean, I love the world. That's an interesting question. That's probably like the most interesting question I've ever been asked, in a way, because it's unpredictable, right? I like unpredictable questions. I love this experience of being alive. I love this experience of being able to live in this animate, living, breathing, humming place. I love my friends. I love communities that I'm involved in. There's aspects of the trajectory of Western thought that I love. I benefit from, the journey of modernity, like we all do. Like, it's, you can critique modernity, but we're all ensconced within it, right? So yeah, I love the West. I just came back from a trip to Europe. I was in France and Italy, and went to a lot of sacred sites and festivals within the Christian tradition, and felt a lot. It's one of the things that I talk about on the podcast, and definitely talk about even more in the course that I'm teaching, is there's not some huge like rift between what you could call the heart of Christianity and the heart of animism. These things were originally, same mystic truth, same knowledge, same interconnection, all of it. The problems with the Western world and the problems with Christianity arose, much later, much after the time of Jesus, who, as I feel and understand it, was bringing the exact same potent mystic truth that has been brought by the mystics from tradition after tradition after tradition, time after time after time after time. So, and in Europe, I had this little kind of project of going around and finding the animate forces that are still present in European cities. And a really good place to look are fountains. If you go and look at fountains, it's so interesting. I mean, one of the things I saw very clearly is like, for an ostensibly Christian culture, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, European history sure presents a lot of Greek animist mythology everywhere.
Yes,
All
yes.
the paintings
When I
that have,
speak
like,
to
are
people.
paintings of the Greek myths. There's Greek, there's tritons in every fountain. There's, and so my strong feeling is that Western animism never died. I think it's lurking there under the surface. I think it got suppressed and I think it got put down. And then you start looking closer, even like in a place like France where I was, and there are local festivals that still honor animate creatures. And,
I grew up with them. I mean, I would
yeah.
do harvest festivals in the church. In May, we would dance. The Virgin girls would wrap red ribbons around a maypole. In the
Mm,
west of England, where I live now, there's stones and phalluses on the hillsides, and
mm,
it's right there in the UK.
yeah.
It's right there, the pagan traditions. And I mean, anyone who goes to Italy and isn't seduced by the sort of beauty of the Western side of things or the
Mm.
classical side of things, I mean, that's a love
Well,
affair worth
I
having,
guess,
I would say.
yeah, sorry to interrupt. I guess, in answer to that question, ultimately is that I don't see a difference between West and East. I don't see, I see the animate heart is still there. I see that the trajectory, the history of the modern West, really the history of what you could call industrialism, right? That is where I start to take, more issue with the trajectory of things. Is, the brutalities that humanity has committed in the last 3,000 years, these aren't in any way limited to the West. Like, there have been brutalities enacted, like, in large scale agricultural societies across the face of the world. So I think that, sometimes I feel like I need to refer to the modern West because I'm trying to isolate a specific issue and talk about it. But you can see, that ultimately there's not really any such thing as East and West.
You love India, right? India seems to
Oh,
have
yeah.
captured your heart in a way. Why India? Just you just love the color, the flavor, the richness there. What's the appeal?
Yeah, I mean, I lived there when I was younger. And I lived there right at a particularly what you could call like initiatory time in my life. So I was 13 years old and we lived there for basically a year in Asia, a good chunk of it in India. And, um, that's a transition time period between like childhood and adolescence. Like, and in that transition time period, going from the world that I lived in to India was like an awakening on all levels. Yes, the colors, the sounds, the sights, the stories, the teeming mythologies, the fact that mythology is not something dead and talked about in books, but mythology is alive and ever present everywhere, right? I mean, this captured my heart and I've been going back ever since. In India, we see, um, it's an interesting place for anyone who wants to separate, like, you know, grand religious tradition from animism and this kind of thing. In India, it's all intermingled and it's all coexists and it's all side by side. And there's a tremendous substrate of animate goddess worship all over the Indian subcontinent, right? And then there are great literary texts, and somehow India managed what the West, there's that word again, what the West could not, which is to keep the animate alive in the midst of these profound, you could say, like literary explorations. So what I see when I go to India is what you could call living mythology. It's alive. It informs the hearts and minds of the people. It informs, societal interactions. It informs how people experience the world. It informs all of it. You go to India on any given day, and there is some type of festival happening, some type of animate force being honored. The calendar of sacred
Mhm.
activity in
Yes.
India is like 365 days a year.
Right, right.
And I love that. I love waking up to the sound of humming and droning and bells and chanting in the morning. I love waking up to offering. I love waking up to flame and water. I love, having that be part of the day. I miss it here, we have, like, I think in this day and age a lot of people have their practice and a lot of people have their,
Mhm.
but that's different from like being
It's not enough.
swimming.
Josh, I'm going to jump in. It's not enough.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
meditated this morning. I dance, I do yoga, I do martial arts. I love the practices.
Mm,
And I often say to sort of people, practices and places, and ritual brings some of those together. But the practices for me is the least important. And if I'm honest, I don't think it's gonna cut it. Ooh,
yeah.
very much. Obrigado. This is my friend who's I realized there was no charger for the laptop she lent me. So
Mm. Who's in Amsterdam but speaking Portuguese?
thank you so much. Gifted once again. The power of the feminine. There we go. Plugged in. So
Yeah, it's
I
not
don't think
enough.
it's enough. I don't think it's going to fucking
No.
cut it. I don't think 10 minutes of meditation in the morning against the obscenity that is disconnection from spirit and the natural world and community and our own bodies. It's not going to fucking cut it, Josh.
Yeah.
So like we need something, we need more powerful medicine. And that's
100% agree. And this is a deep issue because on the one hand, I don't want to discourage anyone from doing their 10 minutes or 15 minutes a day.
better than
I think
nothing.
that, it's better than nothing. But we have to find a way to swim in it again. We have to find a way for it to be the lifeblood of our experience again. Absolutely, positively.
Like one of the questions I have is like, why now with the emerald? Like it's really the zeitgeist. It's not just me that's been turned on to it. You've been doing this for a few years, and I went back and I saw your session at the Embodiment Conference, for example, which was
Mm.
excellent. And but it seems like right now in this sort of confused, chaotic, some maybe it's like something's been smashed open that no one knows what truth is anymore. No one trusts the institutions, and that smashed things open with enough uncertainty. It's like the huge dose of psychedelics or the 5 days of fasting where you're then open to things. And
Mm.
then it seems like that's happened in the world the last few years, that we're open to the magic again, and we're
Mm.
just waiting for someone to come along who was describing it in a not ridiculously naive way, because we can't go back. Like we've got modernist minds, me and you.
Mm.
We absolutely can't pretend we're Native Americans from 1,000 years ago or Celts from 1,000 years ago. We can't.
Mm.
So it's like, what does it look like in this modern era to have festival and community and nature connection again? I mean, one is we nuke each other and we go back to the Stone Age. That's possible. Some may say desirable. And those people make that
AI is the rewilding we've always longed for.
right. So what does it look like to have full festivals? I mean, India is maybe a model because they're pretty modern country. My tech guy is in India and he's involved in a lot of these festivals on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, so there's a lot in what you just said. I mean, the first part of it is like, I didn't know that this was the zeitgeist when I started doing the podcast. I had a feeling that this kind of spirit was rising, right? That there was a longing building. And what I've come to feel, and in a way I guess have known all along, is that there is a deep human longing that isn't being filled by any of the narratives that we're being told are supposed to define our lives. And this has been called, in certain like circles of thinkers and speakers, this has been called the meaning crisis, right? Um, and the old school institutional religious models didn't really cut it, and that was supposed to be replaced with secular humanism, and then secular humanism turned into this kind of individualist market madness, and the market madness isn't cutting it. And we're however many years after World War II, and there's like Nazi resurgence and all this kind of stuff. I think there is an understanding in people that like these narratives are just going to keep circling and circling and circling and playing themselves out unless we find connection to something deeper, unless we find that remembering. So I think there is a deep longing for the animate. There's a deep longing for community, for ritual, for initiation. This is something I'm going to talk a lot about in the next episode,
That's what I'm most
which is,
interested in right now.
yeah, and I'm doing an episode on AI, but I'm mostly going to talk about initiation. And that's a whole, you know.
You touched on that in your war episode, which
Yeah.
was deeply personal to me with the kind of the Ukraine stuff I was doing last year and still do from afar. The sort of lack of initiation and how people initiate themselves. And I've become aware. I feel like I sort of accidentally initiated myself. One through martial arts training with older men, very severe martial arts training when I was younger, and then in Ukraine last year, kind of on another cut of that. And since then, I see a lot of old boys, disgusting old boys. I'm using quite a judgmental word, and this is what all the women complain to me around. All the awesome women I'm around, like the one who just came in and gave me that. They all complain about where are the good men, where are the grown-up men. And there's a lot of single mothers, some of whom are still married, because there's that lack of fully initiated people, and to women to some degree because of the culture as well. But that seems to be very much of the times.
Yeah, I think that if you look around at who is governing our world, it's, Tyson Yunkaporta, the indigenous Australian author. He talks about modernity as adolescent culture, right? Like the drives of the adolescent, like the testing the boundaries, like, hey, I can do this, can't I? And I can do anything I want. And it gets back to our conversation about kind of, woo-woo animism. It's this sense of just like, I can do anything I want without any sense of the responsibility of what it means to give back and be in relation, right?
And that's the reintegration of the conservative side. One of my conservative friends says there should be a statue of responsibility on the West Coast, just like there's a Statue of Liberty on the East. And the reintegration of, okay, I'm being watched and I come from a lineage of people and my impact goes a long way down the descendants and the environment, etc.
Yeah, and
that feels like a profound healing to me, given the culture wars and the polarity, particularly in the States. It seems even worse there.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I don't tend to lump it necessarily into like conservative or liberal. More, I tend to see it in the understanding that like traditional cultures have been structured around initiatory phases forever, and that there is what you could call a transition that happens between the I get to do whatever I want, and in traditional cultures, like during the initiation into adulthood, that I get to do whatever I want is smacked down in a very serious way, right? This is a common theme in initiatory rites, particularly among men. It's a common theme to see like the adolescent who basically says, I get to do whatever I want, that gets reduced to rubble through initiation. Yes. Leaving the initiate at the point of not knowing whether they're going to survive the initiatory process or not, right? And that experience of like, oh, if I'm going to make it through in this world, I am completely responsible to those around me and have to depend on those around me and have to find a way to correlate with those around me and have to, take really strongly to heed the word of those with more experience than I have. Like this is a profoundly universal transition that happens in culture upon culture upon culture. What I see when I look at our world today is that, the old guys in the room, right? The people who are in charge, quote unquote, I just feel very strongly that most of them are still in that adolescent phase of I can take whatever I want, do whatever I want. In fact, this is the purpose of existence, is to take whatever I want and do whatever I want. And when that message gets instilled to the young folks, then you can have like I'm talking about this in terms of like the AI issue, like the idea of like, oh, we should do this and we should check this out and we should do this and yeah, and you know, and the old voices in the room are saying like, yeah, let's get this stuff to market, let's get it out there immediately. That you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
that goes against the understanding of what post-initiatory wisdom would suggest. And post initiatory wisdom recognizes the seasons of things. It recognizes the time to lay low and the time to expand out. You know, if you think of it, I know you do a lot of somatic practice, and if you think of it in terms of the body, right, it's like all external with no internal root. It's like trying to, it's like hyperflexibility with no core, right? It's like trying to express everything out without any foundation. It's like a tree trying to grow with no anchor, right? And our culture is so focused on, I say our culture, I mean Western modernity,
Sure.
it's so focused on put it out, put it out, put it out, put it out. You know, oh, I had a spiritual experience. I got to put it out. Oh, I
Right.
developed a new AI code. I got to put it out before it's tested. Like all of it is focused, all of it is built around this, like, you know, put it out there, right? And the wisdom of elders says, no, there is a season for everything. There is a time to hold back. There's a time to wait. There's a time to let things deeply steep. When I mentioned this in a course call recently, but when was the last time you heard a world leader say anything close to, I think we should wait on that?
Let's chew on that. Let's
I,
digest
I
that.
think we should pause. Why don't we pause for a year?
Let's
A
invade Iraq in a year,
Yeah, like,
right?
you know, a year is nothing. A year
Yeah,
in the scope of
yeah.
nature is nothing, right? But we are so determined to like get things out there, get things out there, right? This is a frantic energetic. It's a frantic energetic.
Yes. Yes.
Translate into any side of the political spectrum, anything. It can translate
Yeah.
into this movement. It can translate into our want to save the world. It can translate into anything. Franticness, right? And there has
I'm someone with ADHD and addiction issues, and over my lifetime, I've gone, oh, you guys are all acting like me now. I'm not sure that's a good idea.
Right, and I can talk about it because I recognize it within myself, you know. And I mean, if you believe the Buddha, it's the nature of the mind. It's just that we have culturally amplified that particular mind, the mind that wants to move forward, to push, to consume, to like, we've amplified that mind. And so I think we're at a time when um, starting to understand slow initiatory steps in basically everything, whether you're talking about like AI coders or you're talking about yoga practitioners. I mean, I say in the new episode, the same drive that wants to drive the AI coder to get like that new piece of untested software
Yes, yes.
out is the same drive within the person who takes a like 200-hour yoga training and thinks that they're like, you know, in the
Yeah, yeah,
position
yeah.
of being a teacher. It's the exact same franticness,
Got
you
it.
know?
It's
And
so
so,
nice to have space, huh? Like
yeah.
conversation I had with my friend in the woods at the weekend. We talked on and off with periods of silence for about 5 or 6 hours, went to sleep, woke up, did some cold water dowsing, had coffee, and then I helped him with his he's got a new dojo, and I just helped him with the woodwork, just covering up some nails for another 3 hours, and we talked on and off. And we were like, oh, that was a good beginning to the conversation. It wasn't a 30-minute Zoom meeting.
Hmm.
It was like, okay, we're designing something pretty significant together. And it was like, we need food. And I gave flowers to his wife, and we slept in tents next to each other, and we worked on a physical project together. And that was the beginning of the conversation.
Hmm.
It's going to be a bunch more stuff like that. Like it just felt this is so much saner than rushing a 30-minute Zoom call that has to have an outcome.
Hmm. Absolutely. And you know, you think of those councils that used to take place and like in certain cultural traditions, you know, and they wouldn't even get to the actual like meat of the council till like the third day,
Uh-huh.
right? Or I think of like Aboriginal grieving, what I've heard of Aboriginal grieving practices, and it's like, oh, we go into the grieving process and we stay there as long as it takes for the grieving to be done. And when it's done, we know, but it could take a year, it could take more than that, right? Understanding the time and season of things, you know, this is wisdom, this is eldership, this is what it means, you know, to be a human that's not being caught by those frantic forces. And now, I'll say too, like quickly, just like in this day and age of like climate emergency and injustice, like it's understandable that people are caught by frantic forces. It's totally understandable,
Urgency, yeah. Yeah.
you know, and I think that it is revolutionary work to start to understand in ourselves how we can start to embody the non-frantic in greater attunement with the actual seasonal cycles of the natural world. I mean, Bio Komalafe just posted a piece today that's absolutely brilliant.
That was great.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's about like, even the notion that like we can save the world, because now we're like frantic to save the world. The world is a whole lot vaster than we think. The world operates on time cycles that are a whole lot vaster than we think, right?
So talking about vast, I'm in a child's bedroom randomly today because I got
Yeah.
locked out of I got locked out of the Airbnb. I had overly good sex, and then the two of us lost our minds and forgot the key. And I'm blaming the sex god. So I've ended up in a child's bedroom on the other side of town to record, and there's a star map in front of me. The kid who lives here obviously loves stars by the looks of things, and it's got galaxies and things talking about time scales. But so, which is the more accurate portrayal of humanity? Star Trek, Star Wars, or Dune?
Wait a minute. You went from vastness to child's bedrooms to stars. I see stars, Star Trek.
Now you know how it feels like, Josh. This is revenge for the altered states you've taken me into. So, which I've heard you mention science fiction a few times, and I love science fiction. Which is the more accurate view of reality, would you say, of those three? Star Trek, which is the sort of, they're sort of liberals in space, isn't it, really? And Star Wars, sort of good versus evil, the Jedi, or Dune, which has all these sort of medieval kind of connotations. Which would you say is the more accurate one?
I'd say that each have their thing to offer. I've talked about, I don't know if you've heard me talk about it. I've mentioned it in an episode, I think. I think that the Star Trek vision in which humanity uses rationality basically to come to this utopian state is the least accurate. I think Dune was far more accurate. Frank Herbert, like the Butlerian Jihad in Dune, the basically big AI rebellion happened thousands and thousands of years before Dune takes place.
Yes.
And Herbert recognized the religious drive within human beings and recognized that that wasn't going anywhere. So Frank Herbert was incredibly revolutionary in that, at a time when science fiction writers were writing like, yes, we're all going to reason our way out of this, and religion's going to be a thing of the past, and humans are just going to be like rational, and we're just going to get along because we're so rational. I think that Frank Herbert was foresighted enough to understand that like the religions arise out of ecologies and they arise out of human groupings, and it's the fundamental way in which human beings have experienced and structured themselves spiritually, religiously, and that's not going anywhere, right? The deep human urge to want to reconnect with the ultimate is not going anywhere. So the idea that, and you see this at play all the time. I mean, and there are scientists who acknowledge this, like we're not just going to reason our way out of the situation. We're not rational beings, right? So I think the Dune vision is profound. It's funny because for people who like really like the first movie, and the second movie is going to kind of continue that story, well, they're going to make 3 movies, and the third movie is going to be a big downer for a lot of people. Because spoiler alert, Paul does not turn out to be like, the great Messiah. He turns out to be someone with a lot of foresight trapped in a range of really unfortunate options and with no good outcomes. And, there's part of me that says, okay, well, then that's probably closer to the more realistic vision. But then there's part of me also whose heart swells at the sound of the Star Wars soundtrack and thinks that, yeah, we can get it all together. And Star Wars, I think, in terms of its understanding of the Force, it's actually incredibly deep and incredibly
Taoist,
profound.
the original version was Taoist. They've
Very Taoist. And
signed some
Star
messed it up later
Wars,
on. Yeah.
when I say Star Wars, I am referring to the original three movies plus Rogue One, and any of the other movies we don't even
None
need to
of the
talk about.
Disney trash that has no understanding of Jungian mythology or Joseph Campbell, and
Any of,
is
yeah.
simply a disgusting pit of postmodernism. I'm with you there 100%.
I love some of the plot points that Star Trek would get into and some of the worlds that it would get into. I just don't think that its vision of what drives human beings is accurate. Yeah. So I think that Dune, if we could have a mix of Star Wars and Dune, I'd probably see that as the most accurate.
Got it. Got it. You don't get asked these questions every day, I'm sure. So keep it surprising.
No, I'm happy to go wherever you want to go.
What is decadence? This is my latest obsession. What is
Oh, I
decadence?
said debauchery. You said decadence. That's
Well, I'm in
interesting.
Amsterdam, so it was the debauchery was seeping through. But what is decadence to you?
Decadence. Yeah, it's not a word that I use very much. I mean, you can look at like the consumptive aspect of society and view it as fairly decadent. I mean, I did have the experience of like walking through these incredible streets of Florence, Italy, which this year has like record tourist numbers, right? And just seeing, like these incredible cobblestone streets and incredible works of art and medieval architecture. And basically, it's been transformed into a giant shopping mall,
Mm.
right? And just like pizza, gelato, pizza, pizza, gelato. like, our like the modern consumptive culture is in a state of what I would call decadence. It's when um there's a beautiful delicate balance between what we take in and what we give back, what we take in and what we give back. And the modern world is so focused on taking in, taking in, taking in, taking in. And whether that's the taking in of buying brand name clothes, or it's the taking in of consuming food, or it's the taking in of consumption of media content, right? We're so focused on that phase of the cycle, and we're so removed from the offering phase of the cycle, offering back, offering back, offering back. Every ritual in some way or another has an offering to it.
Yes.
Every, people ask me a lot about what are the foundations of ritual as it's practiced, in cultures around the world. And there's always offering, there's always surrendering before, there's always feeding of the world around us. So I guess, and it's not a word I've ever really defined before. So thank you for asking a question that I've never been asked. But I guess if I were going to define decadence, it would be when culturally or individually we remove ourselves from the offering phase of the cycle and we only look at the taking in, like us as individual units who just live to feed ourselves, basically.
Yeah, the gorging.
The
Actually,
gorging.
listening to the Emerald, it felt like a very rich feast every episode, and often I have to stop it and go for a walk in the woods or go for a walk by the river for an hour or so.
Mm,
Sometimes it feels like too big a meal to eat in one go. And
mm,
often I listen to an episode twice. Like The Revolution Will Not Be Psychologized, I think I've listened to 3 times, which
mm,
is, I'm a pretty busy guy, so it's unusual for me to spend that time, but it feels like it needs that much digestion.
mm,
And then, and in this realm of like both of us push out content, we push out stuff, you know.
mm,
I'm more of a quantity rather than your quality kind of level, but I think we both offer a lot to the world. And
mm.
people regularly say I'm generous, and I think your podcasts are ridiculously generous. It's free, but people can give. How do people give back to you? And this isn't like a plug to the end of the podcast, because I've got a couple more questions, but
Yeah, yeah.
maybe it's the place. Like it's like we say we want more things like the Emerald, which are subject matter expertise delivered in a heartfelt quality way that takes a month to make. And what's the other part of that cycle? Like people come on your courses, I'm sure they do Patreon. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, Patreon. I have a Patreon group, and it's patreon.com/ the Emerald Podcast. And it's like, it starts at $6 a month, and people get to come to study groups. There's 2 study groups a month, and we talk about the issues on a deeper level. We talk about the issues that the podcast raises, and people ask questions and share with each other. And it's a cool group. And that's one way. And the podcast is really, that's the foundation of support that allows me to do it. I mean, I believe in paying the musicians that I work with, and I pay for studio time and all of this kind of thing. And I, my kind of like indie rock, indie hip hop roots will not allow me to put any advertising on the podcast.
I'm the same. I can't do it. I can't do
There
it.
is just it, like, to me, when I turn on a podcast and all of a sudden somebody's trying to sell me mattresses, it's just like, it's like the worst experience in the world.
Trust is lost as well, right?
Yeah.
A lot of trust is lost.
Yeah. And especially with a podcast that is seeking to be an experience, that experience would be completely changed. If in the middle, I mean, I can't even imagine in the middle of an Emerald episode, like, okay, we're deep in the Dionysian, we're deep in the
Athletic
Dionysian
greens
space.
available. How do you
And
earn a
now, a
living,
word from our
Josh?
sponsor.
Because
Right.
you seem to spend your life going on all these great travels and doing, being part of festivals and initiations and going to, it's not cheap, that stuff, man. Like, how do you earn a living?
Yeah, it's all through the podcast at this point. It's like
And then there's enough patrons that give you like a decent.
yeah, and the courses I teach, the teaching that I do, the trips that I lead. Yeah. And the travel with a family of 4, the travel has diminished a bit in the last few years. It's a combination, kind of the emphasis of teaching online that came with the pandemic, plus just the reality of having a family of 4. And, like, it's a lot more of a logistical challenge to take 2 toddlers. Even this trip
feed one of them to Carly when they're naughty or something. How has that changed you, like in terms of animism? I mean, you've now successfully made humans. My
wife made them.
you and your wife in some effort, right, on some level. So you having successfully made humans, how has that sort of animated your animism?
The podcast was born one day before my first son was born. And it's really been deeply tied to that journey. And I mention my kids, a fair amount on the podcast, and they inspire me. And sometimes they do little cameos, like at the very end of the Moon episode, there's a cameo of my older son talking about wiping his boogers on the moon. But I feel that, there are certain ways in which the podcast is an offering to them, and what I'm hoping, that a foundation that I'm hoping they'll have in terms of how they grow up seeing the world, that they can continue to reference, like, after I'm gone. There's a way in which I feel that the podcast is really an offering for them. And having children has completely reawakened this animate vision. I mean, you just look at the eyes through which the child sees the world, and it's wonderful. I mean, it just opens me up into that place of wonder and mystery and awe. And that place, like my 2-year-old, he's just getting words now, but that place even before words, where every assessment, like, what is it like to assess and respond to the universe before we have words? What is it like to, everything is felt, everything is energetic. It's felt through our skin, it's felt through our eyes, it's felt through our pores, right? It's felt experience. Before we start categorizing it this or that, all we can do is have this deep, fundamental, somatic interaction with the forces around us. And that's not a state that we as adults can dwell all the time. sometimes people are like, I want to live in that childlike wonder forever and this kind of thing. There's a reason there's a sacred calendar, right? The sacred calendar affords us opportunities in which we can find that wonder. And then there's times in our lives when we can't live in that state and we need to, do the laundry and do the dishes and make that as much of a sacred act as we can, but recognize that it's going to be kind of procedural and linear and that kind of thing, right? But they inspire me to feel into things deeper, to open my eyes a little wider. They inspire me, like, and they're a total handful, and they're two boys, and they're like, the older one is picking on the littler one, and like the I think that understanding, like, the pre-family understanding for me was much more centered around like my experience of spirituality and my experience of the animate. And then that center shifts, and then all of a sudden it's about us, and it's about multiple beings, and multiple beings interacting. And love in that instance does not always look like me having endless hours to chant bhajans to the Divine Mother, right? Love looks like me getting his lunch ready and me attending to all those things that need to be attended to. And can that shift be frustrating? Totally. Can it be aggravating? Totally. And it is incredible friction for the fire and alchemy of spiritual practice. Incredible friction for that fire and alchemy. And to me, makes me feel the preciousness of this existence like all the more.
Boom. I'm going to ask about the shiny stones of mobile phones, but I think some of your episodes cover that pretty nicely. Particularly if you've, I was holding my phone in my hand today, feeling very differently as this transfixed by this glowing gem that was listening to you while checking Facebook simultaneously. It was something, but I don't want to end there. Actually, I'd love to end with recurrence. So one of the things I like about ritual and festivals is it happens every year. There's a recurrence. The kind of West, we tend to try and do things once and get it done. The kind of recurrent question, really, you kind of touched on where you spoke to earlier quite strongly already, but I want to go out again, which is why now? Why animism now? Why the Emerald? Why now?
Yeah, and you also asked about like how to translate it into the modern world a bit, and I don't think we really got into that so much. Why now is because I feel like that there is this longing for it like never before. I feel like, the verdict on modernity is kind of out. Like there's more anxiety, isolation, depression, deep existential dread than there's possibly ever been. And in this climate, I think people are being called to the animate in an incredibly strong way. I think people are seeking ritual conjunction. I think people are seeking ways back to that state of remembering. And I think that there's a longing for depth because the overall kind of pop spiritual world doesn't go that deep. It's like you can talk about 1,000 different things, like, oh, I went over here and did this week, and I went and had my tantric initiation this day, and then I went and did my ayahuasca ceremony this day, and I went and and until we understand what we were talking about before, like seasons of change and transformation, until we understand depth, like a lot of that stuff is just going to remain kind of on the surface. And I think that people are seeing that, and I think that there's a real longing for depth of story, depth of experience, depth of practice, right? Depth of practice that can't simply just be attained in a weekend workshop. All of this is up for people right now. And so as far as like translating it back and how we do that and how in this modern world we find this again, I don't have like a definitive answer, but what I think we're going to see, I think we're going to see a rise in what you could call depth traditions, depth practice. I think you're going to see it. And I think you already are. I think you're going to see with the rise of psychedelics, I think you're going to see new traditions being born. I think you're going to see old traditions, people flocking to old traditions. I think there's going to be a deep recognition that in these precarious times, like that type of depth is necessary. And that doesn't mean that I think that all of those things are going to be quote unquote good. I think there's going to be a lot of weird stuff. I think we're going to see like lots of cults arising over the next few years and this
Yeah.
kind of thing. I think you're going to see all of it. But I think that there is this deep longing for depth, for the sacred, and for that to be like regularized and rhythmicized. So it's not just like, you know, floating around like checking this out and checking this out and checking this out. I think people are longing for that depth. So I think, and I'm profoundly interested to see what happens over the next 20 years. I'm really interested to see what happens. I think that, yes, there are states of crisis that need to be addressed. There are all kinds of things happening. But I think of a country, I've traveled and studied in Brazil quite a bit. And I think of a country like Brazil and how Brazil took the
Mhm.
horror of slavery and what expressed through that were all of these incredible syncretic religious traditions, all of these incredible syncretic musical traditions. Like, I see that we're in this kind of time now where you're going to see like the beauty and joy of human syncretism, the beauty and joy of human expression come through in our traditions of the sacred in ways like never before. So I'm excited to see what happens. I know that we've got a lot to figure out. I know that we've messed up quite a bit. I grieve for the state that the world is in, and I'm also profoundly excited to see what happens because I believe in that creative spark of nature and that creative spark of humanity.
Josh, most things in life are disappointing. This hasn't been. So thank you so much for your time. People should check out the Emerald. If every
That's probably
single
the
one,
best compliment. That's probably the best compliment I've ever gotten.
you like that one, you like that. Put that, it's a new one. I might use that again. It's good. It's fresh today. But yeah, I wouldn't. If every single one of the listeners for the Embodiment podcast were to go over and listen to the Emerald and never listen to this podcast again, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind at all. I would happily slit the throat of this podcast if it meant that the blood fell onto yours. So I encourage your listeners to do that. I have people waiting for me at an Indonesian restaurant, so
All right. That sounds awesome.
I need to go. Thank you so much for your time, Josh.
Really good conversation. Thanks for having me.